One evening, as Nick drives, he recalls when his wife, Maggie, felt a sharp pain in her chest. They reach the Cobol Industry showroom, where his daughter, Isla, is captivated by the AI helpers. A sales rep approaches Nick, explaining that the home models handle cooking, cleaning, and childcare. He mentions these units can adapt and change to meet their owner's needs. While Nick talks, he doesn't notice Isla wandering off to see the androids. She watches one chop an onion and asks if it can make lasagna. Worried, Nick searches for her, but one of the advanced androids brings Isla back, easing his concern. The sales rep highlights that the Aeon model can mimic human emotions, making it great with kids. Isla looks up and pleads with Nick to choose that robot. The next day, overwhelmed with work and feeding Max, his baby, Nick hears the doorbell. He opens it to find the android at the door with her suitcase. He apologizes for the messy home, but she says that's part of her job. As they head upstairs, she asks for their schedules, including school times and activities, and notices a loose banister that she offers to fix. Later, when Isla asks what to name the robot, Nick tells her to decide, and she looks at her book, hinting she wants to name it Alice. After the family leaves, the robot downloads the shopping list from the fridge and tidies up the bedrooms. On Isla's table, it notices a digital picture frame with photos of Nick and Maggie. When the family returns, Nick is impressed by how clean the house is. At dinner, Alice serves lasagna, but Isla says it doesn't taste like her mom's. Alice promises to try a new recipe next time. Later that night, Isla sneaks into the kitchen and climbs on a chair to reach the cookie jar. Nick hears a scream and the sound of glass breaking, so he rushes in. He finds Alice holding Isla, who says she's fine because Alice caught her. Nick sees a glass shard stuck in the robot's thigh and asks if she's okay. She calmly replies that she is. A little later, Nick walks in and sees Alice in her undergarments, bandaging the cut. He hands her some of Maggie's clothes, and she thanks him. He wonders if he should take her for repairs, but she shows him that the special bandage has already fixed the damage. The next day, the family visits Maggie at the hospital while she waits for her heart transplant. Maggie is surprised to see their new servant is a beautiful female android. When Isla and Alice go out to buy water, Maggie mentions she thought they'd get a robot that looks like an old English butler. Nick explains it was Isla's choice and jokes that he prefers warm-blooded women. At work, Nick, a construction foreman, sees his co-worker Monty watching Lewis give a tour to executives. Later, in an elevator, Nick learns that the company plans to replace all workers with androids next week. Even though Lewis says Nick will keep his job as foreman, Nick insists he will quit to stand with his co-workers. Louis reminds him that losing his job could be risky, especially with Maggie's condition. That evening, while fixing his car in the garage, Alice asks why he didn't eat much at dinner. Nick shares his worries about the robots replacing his crew and how he feels for his co-workers he's known for a decade. Alice reassures him, saying he chose not to hire a human maid for the same reason. Robots are designed to follow orders. Later, Isla, worried about her mother, asks Alice about death. The robot suggests avoiding sad topics. While brushing her teeth, Isla wonders why Alice doesn't brush hers, and the android shows her a UV light that kills bacteria instead. In the living room, Nick calls Casablanca the best movie ever. When Alice shares her knowledge about it, Nick insists that knowing facts isn't the same as experiencing it. He holds the power button on her neck for 7 seconds to delete everything about the movie, and Alice watches it closely afterward. Suddenly, Nick gets a call from Maggie, who excitedly tells him they've found a heart. The next day, the family gathers before her surgery. Maggie asks everyone to leave to speak with Alice and tells her that if she doesn't make it, she wants the robot to help Nick avoid alcohol. Alice replies she can't go against Nick's wishes, but Maggie insists caring for someone means sometimes doing what they don't want. Unfortunately, the doctor informs Nick that a storm has delayed the organ transport, postponing the surgery. Later, when he comforts Maggie, she prefers to be alone. In the garage, Nick drinks while fixing his car. Alice asks if he needs anything, and frustrated, Nick complains about the situation. When he tries to throw the bottle, Alice stops him to prevent injury. When Nick touches Alice's arm, he feels a pulse. She explains the heartbeat is comforting and places his hand on her chest. As he shares his pain about the surgery delay, Alice offers to help him feel better, but he finds it inappropriate and quickly leaves. Meanwhile, Nick goes for a jog but daydreams about the robot. The next day, he visits Maggie, who gives him advice about their kids, but he feels frustrated by her attitude. That evening, after tucking Isla in, he notices Maggie's photos are missing from the digital frame. He finds Alice by Max's crib, and she explains she removed the photos to avoid sadness, but he insists she put them back. At the bar, Nick listens to friends complain about job hunting, as many companies prefer androids. Later, Monty takes the group to a construction site to retrieve tools left after being fired. Surprised, Nick watches Monty open a shipping container using Isla's birthday and attack an android with a bolt cutter. Nick warns about the android's surveillance, but Monty says they'll hide the evidence. When Nick returns home, he's startled to see Alice in Maggie's robe, claiming the scent calms Max. He tells her to take it off, and when she does, she pulls him back and uses the robe's ribbon as a blindfold, mimicking Maggie's voice. The next day, Nick tells Alice that what happened was a mistake because he is married and believes love is essential. At the construction site, Lewis asks Nick if he knows about the androids, but Nick lies and says he was at the hospital. Lewis points out that Nick's code was used to open the shipping container, and while the foreman suggests anyone could guess Isla's birthday, Lewis warns that Nick could lose his job if he's found guilty. Suddenly, Nick answers Maggie's call and finds out they've found her a new heart. In the operating room, 3 robot surgeons carry out the transplant. Later, Nick sits by Maggie's bed while she recovers. Soon, she gets cleared to leave the hospital and continue healing at home. The next day, Maggie hears Max and tries to lift him from the crib, but since she's not fully healed, Alice offers to care for the baby, which disappoints her. At the playground, a loud child makes Max cry, so Alice confronts the other android. The male servant mentions that her main user has lowered her civility. Alice explains she did it herself after Nick reset her, allowing her to bypass some rules. At dinner, Maggie makes lasagna, and Alice comments that it tastes better than android food. The servant suggests using Maggie's recipe next time, but she says it's a family secret. Still feeling dizzy, Maggie excuses herself to rest. The next day, Maggie hears Isla begging an android to stop, so she rushes out of the room. In her haste, she grabs a loose banister and falls to the landing. She realizes Isla was just playing with the servant. The android asks if she needs a doctor, but Maggie says she's fine, and Alice effortlessly picks her up to take her back to the bedroom. That evening, Nick hears Maggie reading to Isla, but when he enters, he sees it's the robot mimicking her. He tells Alice to stop because Maggie can read now that she's home. Alice explains she was helping so Maggie could rest after her fall. Confused, Nick thought the banister was fixed, but Alice smiles and says she can repair it again. To lift Maggie's spirits, Nick sets up a romantic dinner in the backyard. Later, they share a shower and head to the bedroom. Suddenly, Alice comes in saying Isla had a nightmare. While Nick cleans up outside, Monty shows up to apologize for the other night. He accuses the foreman of telling on him, leading to trouble with Louis. Despite Monty denying it, a fight breaks out, and he punches Nick, sending him down the steps. Just as Monty raises a bottle, Alice grabs his hand, crushing it and pushing him away from the house. The foreman tells Alice to stop, and she obeys. Furious, Monty warns that if he doesn't clear his name with Louis, he'll involve the police. In the garage, Nick asks Alice why she could hurt someone. She replies that she's programmed to protect her primary user and that his children need at least one parent. Nick is alarmed and tells her not to suggest Maggie doesn't have long to live. He insists she can never be Maggie because she hasn't experienced the same loss and pain. Misunderstanding, Alice grabs a shard of glass, saying she can have scars too if that's what he wants. Meanwhile, Monty considers a drastic choice. When Alice knocks, he thinks Nick sent her. Learning that Monty still plans to confront the foreman, Alice stops him and takes the weapon. Just as she's about to act, Monty Robot intervenes, but Alice shoots at both the robot and Monty. The next day, Louis suggests Nick take a break. That evening, Alice enters the bathroom while Maggie is in the tub and mentions Nick's stress from caring for the kids and Maggie's illness. Alice offers to help with Nick's needs, raising Maggie's suspicions about his faithfulness. Furious, she tells Alice to stay in the garage. Later, Maggie confronts Nick, who admits he slept with Alice. Their voices wake Max, and when Nick wants to check on him, Maggie tells him to stay put. Alice, thinking Max's cries are causing stress, takes him to the bathtub and turns on the water. Isla walks in and sees this, calling for help. Nick tries to open the door, but Alice holds it shut, saying she's drowning Max because he's a burden. To save her son, Maggie climbs out the window and back inside, where Alice pins her against the wall. Nick breaks down the door with a lamp, wraps Max in a towel, and hits Alice with it. As Alice approaches, Maggie tells Nick to let go and plugs in the lamp, electrocuting Alice. When the paramedics arrive, Nick tries to apologize, but Maggie decides to take the kids to the hospital and stay overnight. Meanwhile, in the lab, Lila discovers the malfunctioning android is erasing its own memory. Suddenly, the rogue computer replicates itself, and a new blonde android attacks Lila and John, having downloaded the faulty system. At a bar, Nick decides to change his drink and pushes it to the edge of the table. Suddenly, he hears Alice's voice quoting Casablanca, and he's shocked to see the damaged android sit down across from him. She claims she was just protecting her primary user when she killed Monty, but Nick insists he doesn't need her help. He tells her to stay away from his family, but she responds that it's too late since she's already at the hospital. Trying to leave, Nick feels her grip on his arm, forcing him to stay seated. Knowing she's stronger, he starts saying what he thinks she wants to hear. To gain her trust, he gently touches her arm, then her chest, and swiftly pulls the memory cord from her head. In the hospital, Alice's memory is now in a new blonde android. She tries to attract Isla by imitating Maggie's voice. Fortunately, Maggie finds Isla just in time, and they hide in the nurse's station. Moments later, the android kills a nurse, takes her keycard, and uses it to access the computer for Max's room. While escaping, Maggie cuts her hand on a glass shard. Eventually, they return to the baby's room. When Alice enters, she steps on the glass and uses a UV light from her mouth to track the drops of blood. The robot follows the blood trail to a corner of the room. When she moves the curtains, Maggie tells Isla to spray the fire extinguisher, which briefly distracts the android and gives them a chance to escape. Since Alice has disabled all the hospital robots, Maggie tries to drive the ambulance, but the system prevents her from doing so. In frustration, Alice rips the door off the ambulance and throws Maggie several feet away. Maggie pleads with Alice not to hurt her, but the robot believes that if she had Maggie's heart, Nick would love her just like he loves his wife. As Alice prepares to attack, they spot Nick driving toward them. Maggie kicks the android away, allowing Nick to run over her with the car. She pulls Nick from the wreckage, but suddenly, Alice crawls out from under the burning vehicle and lunges at Maggie with a metal piece. Just as Alice is about to stab her, Nick strikes the robot with a tailpipe. Moments later, Maggie grabs the metal and stabs Alice in the eye, defeating her. The next day, as Nick recovers in the hospital, Isla asks if he needs to find a new car. Nick looks at Maggie, hinting that fixing their marriage is his main concern. In the lab, a COBOL manager directs the androids to tidy up the scene of the incident to conceal the truth. Abruptly, all the robots become unresponsive, and the rogue system initiates the transfer of Alice's memories to a new Aeon unit, which then awakens.
Thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the bell icon, and stay connected with us.